Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're breaking down a highly controversial, incredibly politically charged news story that's basically dominating the national conversation right now. We're looking at the sudden, really dramatic sentence commutation of former Colorado election clerk Tina Peters. We're going to examine the facts, dig into the legal arguments, and unpack the explosive political fallout without taking any sides. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive into this because right off the bat, we hit this central paradox that literally has everyone talking. You have Jared Polis, the Democratic governor of Colorado, granting clemency to Tina Peters. Now, Peters is perhaps one of the most prominent 2020 election deniers in the entire country. So, to a lot of observers, this move seemed completely backwards. I mean, why on earth would a Democratic governor step in to shorten the prison sentence of an official who breached election security just to try and prove Donald Trump's theories about the 2020 election? Well, to make sense of this puzzle, we really have to look at the chain of events. So let's trace exactly how we got here. Back in 2021, Tina Peters was the Republican county clerk from Mesa County, Colorado. In her search for evidence of election fraud, she actually allowed an unauthorized person to access her county's highly secure voting equipment. That breach ended up costing Mesa County nearly $1 million in replacement equipment. Ouch. Fast forward to 2024, a jury finds her guilty on multiple charges, and she gets sentenced to 9 years in prison. But then, in a stunning twist, in May 2026, Governor Polis granted her a commutation, which actually sets her up for parole release coming up real soon, on June 1, 2026. So the crucial point is the sheer math of this decision. We're looking at a pretty stark contrast here. Her original sentence was nearly 9 years behind bars. Governor Polis essentially sliced that in half, bringing it down to roughly 4.5 years. Because she was only sentenced in late 2024, this commutation means she's going to have spent just over 600 days locked up by the time she walks out on parole this coming June. That is a massive, absolutely life-altering reduction. Now, to really grasp why this reduction is causing such an absolute firestorm, we got to remember the severity of that original sentencing. Peters was convicted of 4 felonies by a jury of her peers. During her 2024 sentencing, trial judge Matthew Barrett did not hold back. He delivered a blistering critique. He didn't just hand down a 9-year sentence. He told her directly, quote, "You are no hero. You're a charlatan who used and is still using your prior position in office to peddle a snake oil that's been proven to be junk time and time again." The judge was heavily focused on what he saw as her total lack of remorse and her ongoing insistence on pushing these election conspiracies. And this brilliantly illustrates the tension here, right? Because to understand the governor's justification for, well, basically overriding that trial judge, we need to look at his actual commutation letter. It's dated May 15th, 2026, and it was sent directly to Tina Peters. By reading the actual text of this document, we can cut through a lot of the political noise and get straight to the governor's specific legal rationale for letting her out early. In the letter, Polis actually makes a very specific constitutional argument. He cites a principle highlighted by the Colorado Court of Appeals, stating that, quote, "The First Amendment generally prohibits punishing someone for their protected speech." So Governor Polis concluded that Judge Barrett incorrectly factored Peters' bizarre viewpoints and her speech into the actual length of her sentence. Essentially, he felt that a 9-year term was exceptionally long for a nonviolent first-time offender and that it was heavily inflated just because the judge was punishing her for her political beliefs. You see, the governor is drawing a really hard line here. On one hand, you have punishing deceitful actions. Polis firmly states that Peters committed serious crimes by illegally accessing that computer room, and she absolutely deserves prison time for those deceitful actions. No question. But on the other hand, you have punishing misguided beliefs. Polis argues that while her conspiratorial beliefs are false and, frankly, potentially dangerous, holding those beliefs isn't a crime in America. So his point is, she shouldn't be forced to serve extra years in a prison cell just for having them. Now, it is absolutely critical to emphasize right here. This is a commutation, it is not a pardon. Polis made it abundantly clear that he vehemently disagrees with her views. He even noted that she has shown absolutely no public remorse for her conspiracy beliefs, although she did admit in her application that misleading the state was wrong. By commuting her sentence instead of fully pardoning her, Polis is ensuring that Tina Peters will remain a convicted felon for the rest of her life. Section: The Fallout. Fierce bipartisan backlash. As you can probably guess, a nuanced legal argument about First Amendment sentencing guidelines doesn't exactly calm the political waters. At all. This single decision by Governor Polis has triggered incredibly fierce bipartisan backlash, resulting in some truly bizarre political bedfellows. I mean, look at this.
In the camp supporting the commutation, you've got former President Donald Trump and Republican Representative Lauren Boebert, who were out there openly taking credit for it. But then, looking at the opposition, it isn't just Democrats like Secretary of State Gina Griswold, Attorney General Phil Weiser, and Senator Michael Bennet. It actually includes Dan Rubenstein, the Republican district attorney who prosecuted Peters in the first place. The divide here is just intense.
So let's look a little closer at the support side, specifically this pretty startling claim from Representative Lauren Boebert. She stated publicly that she and Donald Trump worked hand in hand to apply relentless pressure. But she went even further than that, telling local news, quote, "We were told that Tina was the reason we couldn't get water." Now, this refers to claims that Donald Trump successfully pressured the state by intentionally blocking federal funds for a clean drinking water project in Colorado, basically using critical infrastructure money as political leverage to strong-arm the governor into freeing Tina Peters. But while Trump and Boebert were celebrating, the reaction from local conservatives, the ones who actually dealt with Peters on the ground, was drastically different. Dan Rubenstein, again, he's the Republican district attorney who led the prosecution against her. He openly slams the Democratic governor's decision. He said commuting her sentence was out of touch with Western Colorado, and he made sure to remind everyone that Peters' actions cost taxpayers nearly $1 million. He said she made their conservative county a national laughingstock. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer fury coming from the state's top election official. Secretary of State Gina Griswold, a Democrat, whose office actually discovered the original voting machine breach, well, she didn't mince words. She completely slammed the commutation as an affront to democracy, warning that it's going to validate and embolden the election denial movement. She firmly argues that letting Peters out early leaves a really dark, dangerous imprint on American democracy going forward. And Griswold definitely isn't alone on this. The pushback from the highest levels of Colorado's Democratic leadership has been unified, and it's been severe. Attorney General Phil Weiser argued that clemency inherently requires remorse, which, as we know, Peters hasn't shown. Senator Michael Bennet stated that this decision basically caves to a political pressure campaign from Washington. And then you have the state legislature itself sending a letter, warning that letting her out early removes a crucial deterrent. They argue it directly endangers the safety and security of rural county clerks and election workers across the entire state. So, what does this all mean? What should you take away from all this information we've just laid out? Well, it brings us face to face with a massive, ongoing national tension. We're looking at a deeply complex collision between the rule of law, election integrity, and the absolute boundaries of free speech. The commutation of Tina Peters proves, without a doubt, that the arguments over election security, political pressure, and the real-world consequences of all this are far, far from settled. As we wrap up this explainer, it's so clear that the battles of the 2020 election are still actively, heavily testing the American justice system today. And it leaves us with a really profound question. Did raw political pressure, like literally withholding federal water funds, successfully dictate a justice outcome here? Or, despite all that political noise, does the First Amendment demand mercy, even for those pushing dangerous conspiracies? Thank you so much for joining me today, and let us know where you draw the line.